At exactly 12:03 on Christmas morning, my phone lit up beside my coffee. My daughter's voice shook so badly I almost did not recognize it. "Mom, why did the Pentagon just call Dad?" For 1 second, I forgot how to breathe. Around me, the Emergency Operations Center kept humming as though nothing had happened. Radios crackled. Someone laughed at the far end of the room. A wall of monitors tracked weather across the southeast. I looked at the clock again. 12:03 a.m., Christmas Day. There are calls you never forget. That one joined the list immediately. But to explain why my daughter was crying in the middle of the night, I have to go back 3 days. My name is Linda Carter. I am 58, and after 24 years in Army logistics, I took a civilian job coordinating emergency operations at Fort Liberty, North Carolina. It is not glamorous, but it matters. When storms hit, equipment has to move, or people need answers, somebody has to keep the gears turning. Most days, that somebody is me. I live 15 minutes outside the post in a plain 2-bedroom apartment with beige carpet, a tiny balcony, and a fake Christmas tree I have used every December since 2014. It leans a little to the left. These days, so do I. I decorated it on December 22nd with white lights, wooden ornaments Emily made in elementary school, and a tiny brass angel my mother bought before she died. I had just settled into my recliner with coffee when Emily called. I answered with a smile. "Well, look who's calling her old mom." She laughed, but it sounded forced. After asking whether I had finished shopping, she went quiet. I knew that kind of pause. Years around military casualty notifications had taught me to recognize hesitation before bad news. Finally, she said David and Melissa were hosting Christmas, and Melissa's parents were flying in. Then she explained that they wanted Melissa to feel fully part of the family, so it would be easier if the gathering were limited to immediate family. Those 2 ordinary words somehow erased 34 years of motherhood. Emily was not trying to be cruel, which almost made it worse. I stared at the brass angel while someone outside loaded groceries into a silver Ford Explorer and Christmas music drifted from another apartment. Life kept moving. "I understand," I told her. She sounded relieved and asked if I was upset. I said I had survived worse Christmases. That was true. I had spent one in a canvas tent in Kuwait and another eating powdered mashed potatoes in Afghanistan. Compared with that, being alone in North Carolina seemed manageable. We talked another 5 minutes about work, traffic, and whether she would replace her aging Keurig. Neither of us mentioned Christmas again. After we hung up, I sat there until my coffee went cold. Before sunrise the next morning, I drove through the gates at Fort Liberty. Inside the operations center, the holiday staffing board still had several question marks. Nobody likes working Christmas, especially younger people with small children. I went to my supervisor, Mark Reynolds, and asked if he still needed coverage. When he said yes, I volunteered. "You sure?" he asked. "You worked Thanksgiving." "I know." "No family plans?" They changed. He did not press. Military people learn when not to. By lunch, everyone knew. Specialist Jordan Ellis asked if I really did not mind giving up Christmas. I told him somebody had to answer the phones. He laughed that his wife would never forgive him, and I advised him not to volunteer. Around the office, people traded stories about wrapping presents, burned pies, impossible in-laws, and toddlers waking before dawn. I laughed when a young captain admitted he had bought his wife the same air fryer she had bought him. Normal problems, I thought, were often blessings. That evening, Harris Teeter was packed. A boy in front of me begged his grandmother for candy until she allowed one chocolate Santa. He celebrated as if he had won the lottery. Back home, I heated tomato soup and watched an old Western. The apartment was quiet. Not lonely, exactly. Just quiet. There is a difference. Christmas Eve was cold and clear. By 6, I was inside the operations center. A plastic wreath hung on the door. The cafeteria served turkey, stuffing, green beans, and pumpkin pie on disposable trays. I ate near the window while younger soldiers video-called their families. One little girl showed off a teddy bear. Another child proudly displayed mismatched Christmas pajamas. Those small moments warmed the room. Upstairs, I returned to weather reports, staffing updates, and routine maintenance requests. Just after 11:30, I poured more coffee. Christmas lights blinked across base housing, while the digital clock counted down another ordinary shift. Then Emily called. I expected a quick, "Merry Christmas." Instead, I heard her crying. "Mom." I pushed back so fast my chair hit the wall. "Emily, what's wrong?" She struggled to speak, then whispered, "Why did the Pentagon just call Dad?" The room disappeared behind the sound of her breathing. I told her to slow down and tell me exactly what had happened. They had been opening presents early because Melissa's parents planned to leave first thing in the morning. David's phone rang around 11:30. Emily had never seen his face turn so white. He went outside, came back, and claimed it was work. That made no sense. David had not worked for the Department of Defense in nearly 10 years. He had retired from civilian contracting after leaving active duty. Then a second call came. He answered in the kitchen. Melissa followed, and Emily heard someone say they needed to speak with both of them. David began arguing, which alarmed me even more. During our 26-year marriage, I had seen him raise his voice perhaps 5 times. He believed problems were solved with lists, schedules, and checkbooks, not shouting. He kept insisting there had to be a mistake. Melissa locked herself in the guest bedroom and refused to come out. Her parents sat there, stunned and confused. About 20 minutes later, 2 black government SUVs entered the neighborhood. The occupants spoke with David on the front porch for roughly 15 minutes. They kept asking about military records and wanted Melissa too. I wrote everything down. None of it fit. David hated risk. He planned vacations, budgets, even grocery trips. If milk was not on the list, we did not buy milk. Federal investigators at his door sounded impossible. Melissa made even less sense. I had met her 4 times. She was cheerful, called everyone sweetheart, taught 3rd grade outside Charlotte, and posted homemade desserts on Facebook. Nothing about her suggested a federal investigation. Emily asked whether David was in trouble. I said I did not know. He was not answering either of us. Then I learned Emily had fled the house and gone to Lauren's apartment, her former college roommate's place. I told her to stay there and lock the door. She said, I didn't know who else to call. That hit me harder than the rest. For the first time in years, when everything fell apart, my daughter called me first. Not her father. Me. I told her I was coming. She reminded me it was Christmas. I said I had noticed, and despite everything, she gave a weak laugh. Mark took one look at me and sent me out without argument. As I grabbed my coat, a young specialist wished me Merry Christmas. I returned the wish and hurried into air cold enough to sting. My 12-year-old blue Ford F-150 started on the 2nd try. I headed toward Interstate 95, then cut west for Charlotte. The roads were almost empty. Most people were asleep or assembling bicycles and dollhouses in warm living rooms. My headlights stretched over miles of dark highway. Every so often a Waffle House glowed like a lighthouse. Open. Always open. 40 minutes into the drive, Emily called again. She had heard nothing from David or Melissa. Then she admitted she felt awful for telling me not to come. She said she had wanted Melissa to feel comfortable and thought she was doing the right thing. She had never imagined ending the night wishing I had been there. For years after the divorce, I had imagined hearing words like those. When they finally came, they did not feel like victory. They felt sad. I told her I had made mistakes too. She said we were not talking about me. I answered that we were talking about family. After a long silence, she asked whether David had lied to us. I could only say I did not know. My mind kept circling one question. Why would the Pentagon care about my ex-husband's wife? Melissa had never served, and as far as I knew, neither had anyone in her immediate family. At about 1:45 a.m., an unknown number called. A calm man introduced himself as Special Agent Brian Holloway with the Department of Defense. I pulled into a rest area. He confirmed I was David Carter's former spouse and asked to speak with me. He would not explain details by phone or say whether David was under arrest, but when I asked whether Emily was in danger, He answered quickly and clearly, "No." I told him I would reach Charlotte within 2 hours. He gave me a number, which I wrote on the back of a gas receipt. After the call, I sat staring through the windshield. The lot was empty, except for an 18-wheeler and an RV outlined in Christmas lights. This was no longer one strange phone call. It was much bigger, and whatever waited in Charlotte was about to change far more than one family's Christmas. I arrived a little after 4:30. The city had that strange Christmas morning stillness. Traffic lights changed for absent cars. Fast food signs glowed over empty lots. A few bundled people walked dogs while most houses slept. Emily met me outside Lauren's building. The moment she saw my truck, she ran across the parking lot. She had not done that since she was a teenager. She climbed in and wrapped both arms around me. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I held her without speaking. Some conversations could wait. That hug could not. She still wore the previous day's Christmas sweater. Her mascara had run, and her eyes were swollen. When I asked if she had eaten, she shook her head. "Well, I'm hungry," I said. "If we're dealing with the federal government, I'm not doing it on an empty stomach." That earned her first real smile of the night. We found a 24-hour diner with 6 customers, mostly truckers and 2 police officers finishing night shift. The waitress poured coffee and observed that we looked as if we had had a rough night. Emily picked at scrambled eggs while I watched the front window. At 6, Holloway called and directed us to a federal office building outside downtown. 20 minutes later, we passed through a metal detector and entered a beige conference room with a long table and stale coffee. Holloway looked mid-40s, with a neat haircut, dark suit, and controlled voice. Beside him sat Special Agent Karen Doyle. After introductions, Holloway opened a thick folder. They were investigating fraudulent claims involving military survivor benefits. They believed Melissa Carter had spent years falsely representing herself as the surviving spouse of a service member killed overseas. I thought I had misheard him. Melissa had never been married before David. Holloway said she had used forged documents. Agent Doyle pushed paperwork across the table. Names, benefit forms, identification copies, and photographs. One showed Melissa in a black dress beside a memorial display, wearing a small gold star pin. Another showed her speaking at a veterans fundraiser. Emily whispered that she had never seen them. Neither had I. For 4 years, Holloway explained, Melissa had attended events identifying herself as a Gold Star widow. People believed her because the documents looked convincing. Investigators now knew they were false. My stomach tightened. I had spent half my life around military families. I had attended memorial services, stood beside wives receiving folded flags, and watched children ask questions no child should ever face. Pretending to belong to that community was not merely dishonest, it was personal. Then Doyle said there was more. Evidence indicated David had learned about the fraud roughly 2 years earlier. Emily's chair squeaked as she looked up. She insisted he would never knowingly allow it. Holloway did not argue. He simply placed emails before us. In one, David wrote, "We need to stop using that story. Somebody's eventually going to ask questions." Melissa replied, "They never do." Another exchange included the assurance that as long as the paperwork matched, they were fine. Emily pushed the pages away. I wanted to do the same, but Army life had taught me that facts do not become less true because they hurt. I asked whether they had collected money. Holloway said yes, among other things. Melissa had accepted speaking honorariums, donations, travel reimbursements, and special assistance meant for Gold Star families. Businesses had also given her discounts to honor military survivors. The individual amounts were not huge, but together they reached tens of thousands of dollars. Emily covered her face and said her father had helped hide it. Holloway said they were still determining exactly how much he had known and done. My marriage had ended because David and I grew into different people, not because I believed him dishonest. Even after divorce, I had respected his integrity. Now that foundation was cracking. As we left, a man in an old army jacket passed Holloway and muttered, without knowing the details, "Every year, somebody tries to wear a uniform they never earned." Outside, Emily asked what would happen. I did not know. Then she said if the story became public, everyone would know. She was not afraid of gossip. She was grieving the father she thought she knew. Quietly, so was I. That afternoon I drove past David's subdivision. There were no news vans. Children rode bicycles, neighbors waved, and Christmas decorations still hung from porches. Behind one ordinary front door, an entire life was collapsing. I could have left it alone. David was no longer my responsibility, and Melissa never had been. I could have said I knew nothing and returned to Fort Liberty. Instead, I sat in my truck for 15 minutes, wondering whether exposing the truth would only wound Emily more. Then Holloway called. Investigators had identified military charity events where I might recognize participants. Those were not just names. They were people I had worked beside, people who had trusted someone wearing a borrowed story. "I'll help," I said. I knew it would cost me. The hardest part would not be proving what Melissa had done. It would be accepting that the man I had spent half my life with might have chosen a lie over the values he once taught our daughter. I had expected the federal interviews to be the worst of it. I was wrong. The worst part was going home afterward and pretending that anything still felt normal. 3 days after Christmas, I was back at Fort Liberty answering emails, reviewing supply requests, and approving emergency staffing. The coffee tasted the same. Fluorescent lights buzzed. Soldiers crossed the parking lot with backpacks. Life continued while I carried a secret. Holloway warned me the investigation would take time. "Facts first," he said. "Opinions can wait." It reminded me of an old command sergeant major. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. So I did not chase rumors. I pulled out old address books, retirement ceremony programs, Christmas cards, and contact lists from charity events I had helped organize. One name led to another. Some people remembered Melissa immediately. Others remembered only after I named a fundraiser or banquet. I drove to Fayetteville to meet my old friend Denise Walker, a retired Army finance specialist who understood benefits better than almost anyone. I explained only what Holloway had authorized. Denise remembered Melissa from a military appreciation dinner in Raleigh. What stood out was how often Melissa told people her husband had died overseas. "Did anyone question her?" I asked. "No." "Why not?" "Because decent people don't assume someone would lie about something like that." The sentence stayed with me. Decent people do not expect cruelty dressed up as grief. Over the next 2 weeks, I met 4 more former co-workers. No one had seen the whole scheme, but each supplied a piece. A volunteer remembered Melissa collecting donations. Another remembered introducing her as a Gold Star widow. Someone recalled David standing beside her, smiling politely while she thanked people for supporting families like ours. Separately, each memory seemed harmless. Together, they became something else. Holloway called every few days to say they were making progress. Whenever I asked about David, he paused and said they were still sorting it out. Meanwhile, Charlotte filled the gaps with rumors. By mid-January, someone claimed David had stolen classified files. Another called Melissa a foreign spy. One absurd story involved cash buried in the backyard. None of it was true. The real story was quieter and sadder. Soon the whispers turned toward me. Emily said David's neighbor believed I had caused the investigation for revenge because he remarried. I was not surprised. When people do not know the truth, they choose the easiest explanation, and the bitter ex-wife makes a convenient villain. Emily defended me, then admitted she thought David believed the rumor too. That hurt because after nearly 30 years together, he should have known better. The next morning, an envelope appeared beneath my office door. No return address. Inside, one handwritten sentence read, "Some families deserve to stay buried." It was unsigned and not an explicit threat, but I showed base security. They documented it and told me not to worry unless more appeared. I still locked my apartment twice that night. A week later, Holloway asked me to review photographs from veterans' events. Most showed ordinary banquet scenes, handshakes, smiles, certificates. Then I stopped at one image. The woman beside Melissa was Carol Simmons. Her son Jason had actually been killed overseas. I had attended his memorial and watched Carol receive the folded flag. The thought of Melissa standing beside her and pretending to share the same loss made me sick. Holloway wrote down Carol's name. Days later, he confirmed Carol had believed Melissa was another Gold Star spouse. She had trusted her, and Melissa had allowed it. For the first time, anger pushed past sadness. Not loud anger, cold anger that settled in my chest. At a monthly breakfast at the Veterans of Foreign Wars Hall, retired Colonel Frank Delaney pulled me aside. He listened, then told me what was really tormenting me. I still felt responsible for protecting Emily's relationship with her father. I admitted I did not want to destroy what remained. Frank said I was not the one who broke the trust. When I asked what would happen if Emily never forgave me, he told me to give her time. Truth doesn't get louder because you yell, he said. It gets stronger with evidence, I answered. He laughed because I already knew the lesson. Driving home, I asked myself whether I secretly wanted David to suffer. The answer was no. I wanted the pretending to stop. I wanted people like Carol Simmons never again to wonder whether a stranger hugging them at a memorial had earned the right to stand there. What I had once thought of as revenge was becoming something else. Not payback, accountability. By spring, the investigation was public. It was not national front-page news, but people around Charlotte and nearby military communities were talking about military benefits, a local charity, and a couple everyone thought they knew. A federal prosecutor called on a Tuesday afternoon and said they were ready to move forward. A hearing was scheduled in Charlotte. It would not resemble television, with surprise witnesses and shouted objections. Real courtrooms move carefully, one fact at a time. And that can be more powerful. Emily called the night before and said she did not know if she could attend. I told her she did not have to, but if she stayed away, she would always wonder. She hated that I was right. I told her I did not enjoy it. She laughed briefly and agreed to meet me there. Veterans in jackets covered with service patches stood outside the courthouse in quiet groups. Reporters waited behind barricades, cameras aimed at the steps. Nobody gave them drama. David arrived with his attorney. I had not seen him face to face in months. He looked older, not because of gray hair, but because he carried himself like a man who had not slept well in a long time. Our eyes met, but neither of us waved. Melissa followed several steps behind. The cheerful woman from Smiling Holiday Posts was gone. She looked exhausted, without makeup, shoulders slumped, staring down while photographers called her name. Inside were wooden benches, an American flag, and the soft shuffle of paper. Judge Eleanor Brooks entered on time. The prosecutor calmly explained how survivor programs depended on honest records. He described false applications, altered documents, and benefits Melissa received by claiming to be someone she was not. A charity director testified that organizers invited her to speak because they believed she was a Gold Star widow. A business owner described donating thousands of dollars in services for military families. Another witness explained that special travel expenses had been approved for Melissa to attend remembrance events across the state. Every act of generosity had been built on a lie. Then Carol Simmons took the stand, walking slowly with a folded handkerchief. I remembered standing beside her at Jason's memorial. She still carried quiet dignity. The prosecutor asked why she had trusted Melissa. Carol looked toward her and said she believed Melissa understood what it meant to lose someone to military service. She had invited Melissa into her home, introduced her to other families, and cried with her. Then she said, "I didn't know I was crying with a stranger wearing someone else's grief." The courtroom went still. Even reporters stopped typing. Melissa lowered her head. Agent Holloway followed. He walked through financial records, emails, event registrations, and false identification. Nothing flashy, only facts. The prosecutor displayed messages on a monitor. David had warned, "Someone's eventually going to verify your records." Melissa replied, "Nobody ever does." In another exchange, he wrote, "We need to stop before this gets bigger." She answered, "After this fundraiser, we're done." They were not done. The fraud continued for nearly 2 more years. David's attorney had him testify. Perhaps they hoped honesty would reduce the consequences. Perhaps no option remained. David admitted discovering the truth, arguing with Melissa and telling her to stop. Then the prosecutor asked whether he had continued attending events where she posed as a Gold Star widow. David closed his eyes and said yes. He admitted knowing donations and business benefits were being accepted. When asked why he did not report it, he answered so softly I could barely hear him, "I convinced myself it wasn't hurting anyone." The prosecutor returned to his table. Silence weighed more than any argument. From the gallery, Carol addressed David. Her voice never rose. "My son gave his life wearing that uniform. Pretending that sacrifice belongs to someone else always hurts someone." The judge allowed the words to settle. I looked at Emily. Tears ran silently down her face, the kind that come when someone you admired all your life becomes someone you barely recognize. During lunch recess, a reporter asked me for comment. I said the day was not about me. When she asked what justice looked like, I told her justice was not humiliating people. It was making sure the truth reached those who had deserved it all along. That afternoon, Judge Brooks accepted Melissa's guilty plea to multiple fraud-related charges. Sentencing would come later, but the facts were public record. David was not charged with the same offenses. Yet his cooperation carried serious civil and financial consequences. He would spend years repaying money that never should have been accepted. No one celebrated outside. There was no applause, no cheering, and no feeling of victory. Real life rarely gives clean endings like that. Veterans simply gathered around Carol and hugged her one by one, not because she had won, but because she had finally received the truth and no longer had to question whether her trust had been misplaced. Emily came to me, took my hand and said, "I understand now." I squeezed her fingers. Nothing more was needed. Sometimes the most satisfying revenge is not seeing someone fall. It is watching lies lose their place to truth. By summer's end, television crews had stopped calling and newspapers had moved on. At Fort Liberty, people returned to training schedules, weather forecasts, and football. Melissa received probation, substantial restitution, community service, and a permanent record. She quietly resigned from teaching before the school district finished its review. David faced years of repayment and lost consulting work. In military circles, word travels fast. Broken trust is not rebuilt with a handshake. I celebrated none of it. There was little to celebrate. One Saturday in October, David called while I trimmed the small maple tree outside my apartment. I watched his name on the screen before answering. He sounded tired and said he owed me an apology. He admitted blaming me because that was easier than facing his terrible choices. "You didn't make one decision, David," I told him. "I know." He said he had kept believing Melissa's promises to stop because believing them allowed him to avoid what was happening. "You wanted the problem to disappear on its own." "Yes. It almost never works that way." He said he did not expect forgiveness. I told him I appreciated the apology. Some relationships never return to what they were. They simply become more honest than before. Before hanging up, he said, "You raised Emily better than I gave you credit for." I watched neighborhood children ride bicycles across the parking lot. We both raised her. I almost made her pay for my mistakes. Neither of us had anything left to add. A week later, Emily invited me to a barbecue restaurant halfway between Charlotte and Fort Liberty. She was waiting in a corner booth and looked different, not older, but lighter, as though carrying painful truth weighed less than carrying confusion. After hugging me, she admitted she kept replaying the Christmas call when she told me not to come. She could not believe she had said it. I reminded her she had been trying to keep everyone happy. She corrected me. She had been trying to avoid conflict. She had imagined that if she arranged everything perfectly, we would finally feel like one large family. "You wanted peace," I said. Instead, I confused peace with pretending. I squeezed her hand and told her some people never learn that lesson. Tears filled her eyes. "I should have invited you. I would have come." "I know, and you probably would have noticed something was wrong before anyone else." "I've had a lot of practice reading a room." She laughed, this time from relief. Over pulled pork sandwiches and sweet tea, we talked nearly 3 hours, not only about the investigation, but her childhood, army life, my years working holidays, the fishing trips David used to take her on, and the ornaments we packed away each January. For the first time in years, we were not stepping around old arguments. We were simply talking. Emily hosted Thanksgiving for just the two of us. We burned the rolls, forgot cranberry sauce, and laughed so hard at my failed turkey carving that we bought pumpkin pie from the grocery store instead of pretending my homemade one was edible. It became one of my favorite holidays in years. In December, the old artificial tree came out again, still leaning left and missing a branch near the back. A week before Christmas, Mark asked whether I planned to volunteer again. I said I could cover part of the morning. Only part? My daughter expects me for dinner. He grinned. I was hoping you'd say that. Christmas Day was cold and bright. I spent the morning handling staffing issues and occasional calls. Around noon, I gathered my things. A young soldier wished me a good Christmas as I left. The drive to Charlotte felt different, not because the roads had changed, but because I was no longer wondering whether I belonged. Emily opened the door before I knocked. Baked ham filled the house with its smell. She hugged me and wished me Merry Christmas. The dining table was not crowded. There were no complicated seating arrangements, no effort to manage everyone's feelings, and no walking on eggshells. There was only family trying honestly to do better than the year before. After dinner, Emily gave me a hand-painted wooden ornament, a tiny pickup carrying a crooked Christmas tree. It leans, I said, laughing. So does yours. We hung it together. People sometimes ask whether I got revenge. I tell them, that is the wrong question. What mattered was not watching anyone lose a reputation or repay money. What mattered was that the people who had been deceived finally received honesty. Truth could not erase the hurt, but it stopped the hurt from spreading. This experience taught me that character reveals itself when telling the truth becomes uncomfortable. If this story stays with you, share it with someone who still believes integrity matters. And if you have ever had to choose between staying quiet and doing what was right, I hope you found the strength to make the choice you could live with.